Today in this country, we have a raging debate over the issue of gun control. It's one of the most divisive issues that our country faces today, and lots of misinformation is being spread around on this issue. Today, we're going to talk about the process of buying a firearm in this country, and some of the loopholes and misinformation that's spread about it, and how this process has changed over the years. I have grown up around guns my entire life and have been to the store when several family friends and relatives have purchased firearms, so I'm very familiar with this process. Purchasing a firearm in the United States is a very strict process that has evolved over time. There are many rules that must be followed, and if they are not followed, it can result in the loss of licenses and even prison time for people. According to Giffords Law Center, all federally licensed dealers, or FFLs, must run a background check on a firearm purchase. Private sellers are the only exception in this country to who does not have to run a background check. If you know the person, you are legally allowed to sell or gift them the firearm without a background check, but you are legally liable if you sell a firearm to someone you know cannot possess one. If they commit a crime and you know they can't possess it, you can be held liable for it. An FFL runs the background check through what is called the National Instant Criminal Background Check Service, or NICS. The NICS is maintained by the FBI and is run using information that you put into the ATF form 4473 when you go to purchase a firearm. This National Instant Criminal Background Check is designed to catch any reason that you are prohibited from purchasing a firearm. Certain prohibitions include being a convicted felon, a dishonorable discharge from the United States military, a fugitive from justice, or misdemeanor domestic violence. There are many other charges in different states with stricter gun laws that may prohibit you from owning a firearm, but those are the ones on the national level that will prevent you from owning a firearm. Okay, now that we have talked about the federal process, let's talk about the state process. Some states require universal background checks, which means that they require background checks on all firearm sales. So instead of the federally licensed versus private sellers, all sellers of firearms are required to run a background check. Instead of just selling it, a private seller has to go to the local sheriff or local chief law enforcement official and tell them they are selling a firearm through a private sale, and that chief law enforcement official will run the background check for them. 10 states plus the District of Columbia also institute waiting periods on purchasing a firearm. The waiting period begins when you go in and have the background checks initiated. When the background check is initiated, you must wait a certain period of time between the start of it and when you can pick up the firearm. This allows more time for background checks to pick up anything that may not, come up in certain background checks or that may be missed in a background check that's run too fast. On the national level, if the background check is not completed within 3 days, you may pick up the firearm without having completed the background check. Some states state that these waiting periods reduce the risk of that happening, a convicted felon getting a firearm through that method because the background check was not completed in a timely manner, or that it may prevent impulsive firearm purchases that people purchase to commit suicide with. Now that we've talked about the process of purchasing a firearm and how it is different on the federal and state level, let's talk about loopholes and some common misinformation that we see spread around in the news. In an interview conducted with my uncle, who has his FFL, in September of 2020, I learned from him some of the loopholes and how they are not true and how they are twisted to make them seem like they are a bad thing. One common one that we hear is the gun show loophole. The gun show loophole is commonly spread around as you don't have to pass a background check at a gun show. This isn't exactly true. All gun laws apply consistently across the board. Any FFL that sells at a gun show still is required to run a background check, and any private seller at a gun show is not required to. The laws don't change based on where the sale happens. The other one is the online loophole. The online loophole is one that we commonly see spread about how people illegally get firearms. While this is technically kind of true, it's being misrepresented. Yes, you can purchase a firearm online without a background check. I can purchase one right from my computer in my dorm. The key is that you have to pass a background check to obtain the firearm. When you purchase a firearm online, you're required to put in the information of a local FFL that will accept the transfer of the firearm for you. When you put in that information, the FFL is notified by the company you are buying the firearm online from, and that FFL contacts the local law enforcement official to run the background check for you. Once you pass the background check, the firearm is shipped to the FFL, and the FFL will give you the firearm. You must pass that background check to get the gun. There is no way that you can buy a gun online and get it without passing a background check. That's commonly spread around in the media as you can buy one online without a background check and get it. Kind of true because you can purchase without one, but you still cannot get the firearm. Now that we've talked about some common misinformation and so-called loopholes in the process, let's talk about how the process has changed over time. The Federal Firearms Act of 1938 created the Federal Firearms License and requires dealers to maintain records of every firearm that they've ever sold. It's arguably one of the biggest acts of gun control in our nation's history and one of the most significant. Another very significant act of gun control is the Brady Act of 1994. The Brady Act is the bill that created the background check requirement for firearms purchases. Prior to 1994, background checks were not required federally in the United States to purchase a firearm. The Brady Act also introduced a waiting period for handguns, a 5-day waiting period for purchasing handguns. That was later removed in 1998 with the creation of the National Instant Criminal Background Check Service. Prince versus United States. Prince versus United States is a large Supreme Court case that has significantly altered gun control in the United States. According to Robert Longley's timeline of gun control in the United States, Prince versus United States is one of the largest gun control cases in the United States. Prince was a Montana sheriff from a small county that sued the federal government over the background check requirement created by the Brady Act. He argued that local law enforcement could not be required to use their own resources to run a federal background check for firearms purchases. He ended up winning in district court when the U.S. would appeal, and he would lose in appellate court after that. He would later win in the Supreme Court by a 5-4 decision, with the Supreme Court ruling that local law enforcement could not be required to use their own resources to run a federal background check. The background check requirement of the Brady Act was then placed on hold until 1998 when the NICS was created and maintained by the FBI. When the NICS was created, it also removed the 5-day waiting period for handgun purchases. Now that we have discussed some of the how the process has changed, some of the misinformation, and how the process happens, I hope that you have a better understanding of the process to purchase a gun in the United States and how the misinformation can be spread. I hope that next time you see some of this misinformation spread on the news, you'll have an understanding of why it's wrong and how the process actually happens, and that you'll be able to call out the news when you see this happening. And these are my note cards